What is up, my Squirtleites? It is I, your king, welcoming you to my long-form, unscripted Destiny 2 review/impressions video. And we're only a little over a month late at this point. But you know what? I have re-recorded this video easily over a dozen times over the past few weeks, trying to get my thoughts straight, trying to consider every single point of view, trying to figure out what I should talk about and what I shouldn't talk about, and experiencing all of the content that the game has to offer, just so that I could give you guys a concise, simple, and as unbiased as I can possibly manage thoughts on what Forsaken brings to Destiny 2 and how it improves things. Because, I mean, I've done this over and over where I've talked about what I think are the good points, but then I keep going back and going, oh wait, there's so many people with a different perspective of Destiny than me that aren't going to feel the same way about this element or this element. And honestly, there's this point where Destiny has become such a complex engine, both in terms of the game mechanics as well as its reputation, that it's very hard to talk about things in a positive light without going, oh, but there's also this. As much as I love Destiny, not everybody feels that way. In fact, a lot of people don't feel that way. It's very, very popular to hate on Destiny, and it has been kind of ever since its launch in Destiny 1. I know a lot of people like to do that with Destiny 2, but there's a problem in and of itself right there, because it seems a lot of people forgot how Destiny 1 was perceived when it first came out, and it was given a lot of the same criticism that Destiny 2 got. Although I don't know if I would necessarily say rightfully so. I feel like Destiny 2 deserved it more, but we'll get into that in a minute. So I'm going to start by addressing three separate crowds of people who all have different perspectives on Destiny. And we're going to start with the crowd, and this is going to be the shortest summary for you guys. The crowd that has wanted Destiny to be something that it's not. The people who immediately disliked Destiny 1 from the beginning because it wasn't the next Halo. It wasn't Bungie's next magnum opus, story-based thriller like Halo that they wanted it to be. It ended up being a looter shooter. And the people that want this amazing story-driven experience that they envision in their heads, and I'm not trying to be condescending, by the way, I'm just telling the people, because I know there's a good subset of you out there that really want this to be Halo, especially because 343 ain't doing it any favors. Those people who want Destiny to be that, your mind's not gonna change with Forsaken. It's just not. It's, in fact, if anything, Forsaken doubles down on the elements a lot of you people don't like. That's not to say the story isn't good. In fact, I would wager to say that right now Destiny is in peak story mode, but there are so many other elements around that a lot of people who like the Halo games don't like, that I can't even for a second try to recommend this game to you and be like, oh, well, this is where everything changes, because it's not. If anything, Forsaken kind of puts us right back where we were when Destiny 1 The Taken King came out, and that was in 2015. So again, if you want Halo, you're not going to get Halo here. If you want the Destiny that you thought you were going to get before 2014, you're not going to get that. I'm sorry. Forsaken does not change that. If anything, it just hammers home the Destiny formula more. To the next subset of people, the people who have only ever had a passing interest in Destiny, the people who have maybe bought the vanilla version, got tired of it, or the people who got Destiny 2 for free off PS Plus, or have never touched the game in their lives. Are you going to like Forsaken? The answer to that is maybe. A big, huge maybe. And I'm going to say it is almost entirely dependent on whether or not you want to dedicate time to it. And I would say another dependency is whether or not you actually have people to play with. First things first, Forsaken does kind of bring the grind back. That Destiny is often criticized for, but I would say this is the first time it's really been a grind. Throughout Destiny's history, a lot of people have always been like, oh, well, Destiny has this huge grind to it. Not really, actually. Even in The Taken King, when it was at its worst, I would say, quote unquote, you could pretty much reach the highest level you needed to play everything in the game, you know, in a grand total of like 40 hours. Like, that's not even saying that much considering most games nowadays. Maybe you could argue 50 or 60 for inexperienced or, you know, absolute solo players who just don't have time to play games very much. Then you could maybe argue that, but that's like at the longest, which that's not really insane when you consider a lot of games, and it really wasn't grinding. It was just kind of playing through all the content until you got all the stuff. In Forsaken, that time really is doubled, tripled, quadrupled. Now, there is a caveat and a catch to that, and we'll get into that much later in the video, that actually makes the grind, quote-unquote, really not bad at all in Forsaken either, but it is a much bigger time sink. I have been playing this game pretty religiously ever since it launched, actually. According to the site that tracks your playtime in Destiny, I have put in almost half of my 300-hour playtime with Destiny 2 in just the last month. And I'm still pretty short of the level cap in this game. So I still have a ways to go. Granted, you make it to the level cap in boosts, and then there's lots of times where you're just not really gaining anything, and that I've also been playing. But regardless, it still takes a long time. It is a time sink. And now having people to play with makes that considerably better and makes it considerably more fun. I do believe in general, Destiny is so much of a better game if you're playing it with people. But that's really hard to do. I mean, obviously not everybody can do that. And I just play it solo and I still have a great time. But it does get even better once you have friends. With all of that said, again, it comes down to a maybe. It really depends on your circumstances and whether or not you actually want to get invested into it. Because if you want to get invested into it, you will be rewarded. You really will. As long as you like the core gameplay itself, you will be rewarded if you want to waste your time, quote unquote, playing Destiny and grinding all the way up. If you don't immediately get hooked and you don't really feel like investing your time into it to see what the buzz is all about, then you're not going to have a good time, so don't even bother. I would just say don't buy Forsaken at all. Now, to the third subset of people, the people who left because Destiny 2 was an awful state when it launched, an honestly unforgivably awful state, a state that it never should have been in, but it was only in because of Activision and Bungie listening to focus groups and honestly making the game for people who weren't going to like Destiny to begin with. That's really what Destiny 2 Vanilla was. For the people who hated it in that situation but absolutely loved Destiny 1, is Forsaken enough reason to come back? And to you, I can give a yes. Because like I said earlier, Forsaken is in the state that Taken King was. It's brought back the grind, it's brought back the reward, it's brought back the meaningful activities, it's brought back a lot of cool, interesting events, and actually, I guess I shouldn't say brought back, because it's not like they're reusing things. Just want to make that clear. They're not actually reusing things, but they've definitely brought back the feeling of the hobby that a lot of us loved in Destiny 1, which is good. And I have been having the time of my life playing Forsaken. There are definitely elements I will criticize, and we will go over those, but I personally love it. So, again, if you just were burned out after Destiny 1 and upon seeing the state of Destiny 2 after the first few weeks, like most of us, and we're just like, F this, I'm done, now's the time to come back. It really is. The game's great again, in that regard. So, there are still issues, though, and we're going to get into those. So let's start by going over each topic. We're going to start with the story, okay? The story of Forsaken. And I'm not going to spoil anything. We're going to save that for the Let's Play, but let's just talk about it. Is it good? Well, that's also a tricky question. And that's, as you see why I was having issues making this video, because I'm going to probably end every single statement like that. It's a tricky question. I'm going to say overall, yes, the story is very good, actually. But it depends on where you feel like the story ends. There is, once again, much like there has been in every single Destiny content that's ever been released, a story campaign. Consists of missions, you go through it, there's some adventures in between, you finish those, and you beat the final boss in the end. That element, the story is at best average. It is okay. In fact, I would be willing to say that part is done much more poorly than the Taken King did it. However, once you beat the final boss, the story really does not end from there. You are then tasked with doing a few extra things to unlock a new playable space, okay? And this playable space is known as the Dreaming City. You move from the Tangled Shore, which is where the main place is set, to the Dreaming City. There's 2 playable open world spaces that are introduced in Forsaken. The second one is where things really start to get interesting. And a lot of this is where Destiny is at its strongest. Because rather than telling all of its stories through cutscenes and doing a lot of it through, honestly, pretty okay, mildly written dialogue that's just kind of corny, because that's how Destiny's always been written, they don't utilize those in the Dreaming City. They instead incorporate very, very clever ways of telling story, most of it visual. And honestly, the entire story kind of turns on its head once you do everything in the Dreaming City. Now, again, not to spoil anything, but pretty much with every single campaign, once you've reached the end of the campaign, you beat the final boss, there's kind of a feeling of, yeah, we did it, victory, and all that remains is the raid, and that's just kind of cleanup time. Like, they've all felt like that. Like, even the Taken King does. Oh, you killed Oryx's body, now just go to the raid and finish off his soul in his throne world. Or Rise of Iron was, by the way, there's these fallen bad guys, but we'll worry about them later, just kill the Siva, and then you kill the Siva, and you win, and then you go to the raid to clean up the fallen guys. This time, there's a very different feeling. You beat the campaign, and you go, yay, we beat the bad guy. Except you didn't. You didn't beat the bad guy. It's actually kind of flips on its head, and as you progress through the Dreaming City portion of the story, it gets worse. It doesn't get better. Things start to get more and more dark and mysterious, and you start to raise more questions. And not only that, but the Dreaming City is on a 3-week cycle that constantly changes things, and it's really well done. This element of the game is awesome. It's something that I can't spoil it because it's such a touchy thing and such an easy thing to spoil, and there's so many elements I would have to explain first if I even wanted to talk about it, and it's just I'm gushing because it's really well done. This is Destiny at its storytelling premium. It really is. And I really do think that if you want good story out of Destiny, this is the part where it unlocks. This is the part where you start to see, everything kind of opens up and you start to realize how they're finally incorporating the lore, not just the main campaign bullcrap with Cayde 6 and, all the characters that have been kind of boring throughout this story, where they're actually incorporating the world lore into the game story, and things start to get a lot more interesting. So again, as I said, if you just run through the main campaign, it's average at best. But if you decide to go a little bit deeper, that's when you're going to get richly rewarded for some amazing story content and some amazing lore. Again, Destiny is not a spoon-fed storytelling game anymore. It's not a bad story. I will stand by that to the day I die, that the story is not bad. But it's not easy to access either, because let's face it, Destiny is an MMO. It's not supposed to spoon feed things, and it doesn't even do that very well when it tries to. So with a little bit of patience, if you're willing to invest into it, you will be richly rewarded for the story. How about the gameplay? Well, they have reworked everything basically to function the same way it was in Destiny 1 when it comes to random rolls and stuff like that. They still have the new weapon types such as submachine guns and grenade launchers. I still wish they'd bring back heavy machine guns, but I digress. Oh, that's right, they are doing that, but it's not until later, a couple months down the road. Regardless, so everything has kind of been reworked. The way that the weapon system works now is a little bit different. So to avoid the balance issues that they ran into in Destiny 1, where you could have elemental weapons in all 3 of your weapon slots due to raid exotics and things like that, they have changed it so that you now are locked into a kinetic slot, an energy slot, and a power slot. And it's not the same way it was in Destiny 2 Vanilla, because the kinetic slot just means that your weapon has no element, meaning it's not good for breaking shields, all right? Your energy slot, you have to pick and choose, and then your power slot, is just heavy weapons in general. Kinetic slot consists of snipers, shotguns, sidearms, SMGs, auto rifles, scout rifles, pulse rifles, hand cannons, and that's it. Yeah, so that's it. Energy weapons, same thing, except it also includes fusion rifles. And then in the power weapon slot, you have swords, grenade launchers, linear fusion rifles, and rocket launchers, and then I'm assuming heavy machine guns when those launch. Now the catch here is that fusion rifles, snipers, and shotguns still take special ammo. You still need the green ammo brick. But again, you can equip those in any slot. SMGs, scout rifles, hand cannons, auto rifles, pulse rifles, and sidearms require the white ammo block, the primary ammo block. And then everything in the power weapon block, grenade launchers, rocket launchers, swords, and linear fusion rifles, all of those require the heavy block, heavy ammo block. So that's how they're separated. So you always have to have a kinetic weapon, an energy weapon, and a power weapon equipped. But then their ammo is weapon dependent, weapon type dependent, not weapon slot dependent, if that makes sense. So it actually allows for a little bit more creativity in your loadout. You can still run the old Destiny 2 vanilla version of, running with 2 primaries at once and then a heavy weapon. Or you can run in the old Destiny 1 way, where you've got your primary, you got your special weapon, and you got your heavy weapon. If you really want to, but you're going to be kind of low on ammo sometimes, you can run with 2 special weapons. You can run with a shotgun and a sniper, but they're going to be sharing their ammo pools. Things like that. So it actually allows for more variety in the way that you want to play the game and the way you want to switch things up. And this applies to all of its game modes, which is really freaking cool. So I'm a definite fan of that. They introduced a bunch of new super tweaks as well, and some of these supers that they have introduced in the game are so freaking fun. I cannot gush about them enough. I would say that if I were to rank my top 5 supers in Destiny out of the 9, I mean probably all but one of them would be the new supers. They're freaking good supers, man. And actually there's more than 9. There's 15 or whatever, but they're really freaking good supers. Some of these are an absolute riot to use, and they did a great job with these new subclasses. I mean, there's one where you're freaking kamehamehaing at people with a freaking laser beam out of your hand as a warlock. That's really cool. The Void Warlock one is probably my favorite, and it's just super fun. You just create explosions around you. The Hunter one, where you just chuck a gazillion flaming knives to obliterate anything. It's really fun. Destiny 2, if anything, is Destiny's gameplay experience when it comes to the supers, the weapons, all that stuff at its premium. Better than the game has ever been in that regard. I don't think that's really difficult to say. There are a couple imbalances with certain things in terms of PvP and PvE, but it is at its best. So if you want to experience that at its finest, that's enough reason, I think, to go pick up Forsaken. It's really freaking fun just playing the game right now. And that's something that I just have been longing for forever, because everything in Destiny 2 felt like a pea shooter, at least in the vanilla version. Regardless, let's talk about the gameplay loop itself, because that's been something that Destiny 2 vanilla has been plagued with pretty badly, as in you could do everything that you're supposed to do in a week in an hour, and you wouldn't really go anywhere, and then you're just like, alright, well that was it, and then you're done. And it sucked. And it wasn't fun. Well, Forsaken does things completely differently. It's actually probably a more insane amount of stuff to do, I guess, quote-unquote stuff to do, every single week than Destiny's ever had. Okay, so for instance, in Destiny 1, every single week upon reset, you could do, after you've finished all the activities that you have in your quests and stuff like that, your ways of grinding up, getting weapons and stuff like that, usually consisted of doing a daily story. You do a story mission. You could go do some quests, a patrol event, just a couple quests, some public events, and then do some strikes and some Crucible, and that was it. And then you were done. And you could probably get everything done that you needed to for the week on all 3 characters in a matter of, I would say, a day or so. And when I mean a day, I mean you get off work, you go home, and then you play it. So 5-6 hours. Maybe that's only 2 characters. Maybe a little longer than that. But regardless, didn't take very long. Destiny 2, on the other hand, Forsaken especially, you are just bombarded with things to do on a week-to-week basis. It's kind of overwhelming, actually. Even for me, I'm just what do I make of all this? What do I do first, and in what order? For me, I'm basically just focusing on one character, and I don't have all my stuff done for the week on that character for 2-3 days. It takes me a long time, and that's one character out of 3. So it pretty much is an all-week affair doing everything, for all 3 characters, and this is coming from a person who has a full-time job, so obviously your mileage may vary depending on how much time you have in your day and stuff like that, but for me, where at max I probably can average about 3 to 4 hours a day, and this is at max, per day throughout the week. It would take me all week to get all 3 of my characters done, and you know what? I haven't even managed to do that even once, so yeah, there's a lot to do. There's your strike activities, your daily heroic stories that they've reintroduced. There's your crucibles. There's a new gambit mode, which we'll get into in a minute. There's the flashpoint that you have to do. There's some heroic adventures you have to do. There's all sorts of little bounties that you have to go after that give you different unlocks. There's raid-based things to do. There's a ton of stuff to do in the Dreaming City, that new playable space that they give you to do. Stuff to do in the Tangled Shore, which gives you tons of bounties to go after specific enemies that you need to track down in all sorts of lost sectors all throughout the game in all sorts of different areas of the system. This game works your tail off now, and it's not in a bad way because it's fun. It's really fun to do. Well, most of it's really fun, and unless you hate certain modes, but it's really freaking fun. And again, there's so much to keep you busy. Again, it can seem kind of overwhelming, but the cool thing about it is no matter what you're doing, you are always progressing. Always. Even if it's just in tiny, tiny baby steps, you are always progressing. And that feeling is wonderful. That is probably my favorite thing so far about Forsaken. There is no minimum requirement, there's no ceiling, technically, for any sort of player. Even if you never raid, even if you never do the hardcore Crucible content, there's no such thing as a ceiling in this game. It just takes longer to get to the cap. Like, you're not going to be stuck at 585 when the max is 600 like you've been in previous expansions. You can always get to the very end, just like all of the hardcore players. It just takes you a little longer depending on what you're doing. But you know what? That's what's awesome. There's always something to chase. There's always something to go after. For crying out loud, not a single person I know can get an exotic. I mean, and there's plenty of those that just got introduced, so you can start chasing those as well. Not to mention, there's also some actually much more interesting and much more fun to go after old stuff that's actually a lot more bearable now that the game has been readjusted and fine-tuned, and it's actually a lot more pleasant to go after those things. Stuff like the stuff in the Warmind expansion, like Escalation Protocol, and the Sleeper Simulant, and Polaris Lance, and all these other things that they introduced in Destiny 2 Vanilla that was, at the time, just a pain in the butt. But now, with the way the game's been rebalanced and the way it's been restructured, that stuff's actually kind of fun to chase now. Like, I finally buckled down and went after most of the Warmind stuff during, within the last week or so, and I had a great time doing it. And I was shocked because I know I started on it, when Warmind came out, and I hated every second of it. It's really funny how that works with just a couple tweaks to make the game a much more enjoyable experience, like an overall core experience. So, with that said, the grind, it's there, and it's very heavy and hard, but it is almost perfect. It has been done in a way that I think is very easy to get behind and enjoy, and isn't too confusing, which is something that Destiny has missed the mark on pretty much ever since its conception. So with that said, now let's talk about the raid for a minute. And I'm going to talk about this very briefly because I don't want to make any spoilers, but this raid it's a raid and a half, I think is what you can say. It's a lot more intensive than anything that any raid has done before. And it's also something that players are going to be waiting a long time to get to, because that's the other thing that is kind of a tough sell for Destiny veterans. Most people are used to playing the game, they get the content, they play the game for a little bit, they grind up to a certain level, and then after about a week or two, they're like, all right, we're ready for the raid. And then they go do the raid, and then once they've done the raid, it's like, all right, do a couple more raids, and then I have all the stuff, and I'm done, and I'm good. Not so with Destiny 2 Forsaken, ladies and gentlemen. It's a lot harder to get to being raid ready. In fact, I'm not even there yet. Not even close. After all the time that I've sunk in, the 150 hours, I'm not even there on my highest level character. It's not easy to get to. And then once you get to it, you better be over leveled, or it's going to kick the crap out of you. It's not an easy raid. This is a very, very intensive experience, but it's actually not that difficult to get behind. It's just, in terms of the concepts and the mechanics, that stuff's not really too insane. It's just about synergy and having people to play with, and then just execution. That's all it really is. And if you're a little over leveled, you shouldn't have too much of an issue. But I think going into it blind and experiencing it is the way to do it, because this is the most well done raid yet, especially in terms of the storytelling and the setting and the atmosphere and the aesthetic. It is amazing, and the payoff is wonderful. It is such a fantastic piece of content that I highly recommend everybody, and it's always been this way. Raids have always been the pinnacle of Destiny content. Even the people that hate Destiny, for the most part, can acknowledge that the raids are incredibly well done. A lot of people can't even believe the fact that raids are in Destiny, but they are, and they're really freaking well done. Vault of Glass was amazing. Crota's End was good, but it also had some issues. King's Fall was very, very good. Wrath of the Machine was short but sweet. Leviathan, pretty darn good. This latest one is nothing short of a masterpiece. I mean, I've heard nothing but good things about it. I've seen nothing but good things about it. I mean, I've experienced it myself vicariously, and I can tell you it's just a wonderful, wonderful experience. So that's really cool. And then there's also even other endgame content to chase after, such as like the Shattered Throne, which is kind of a 3-man raid experience. So it's a little bit more accessible for those people who can't do the Last Wish because they don't have enough people to raid with. All right. So that's it for the endgame stuff. I'm going to touch upon 2 more topics, and then we're going to end this video. So, other 2 topics. Crucible, PvP. How is that doing? Well, again, it's complicated, but I'm going to say that it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's, in a lot of ways, back to the way it was in Destiny 1 in terms of the way that it's played. There are imbalance issues, but that's not really the stuff that concerns me. The only things that really concern me with Destiny's Crucible at the moment are 2 things. The first being map design. So I'm going to try to analyze this and explain this in the best way that I possibly can, but I don't know if it's going to really come across very well. But most players feel this way, and I also feel this way, and that's the fact that Destiny 2's map design philosophy does not work to the type of game that it is. It might have worked back in vanilla when it was a 4 versus 4, but I mean, that had so many other issues anyway that map design was the least of anyone's worries back then. But now that everything else has been improved, the map design is a little bit lacking, and I'm going to explain why. So it's very evident in the fact because there are 4 maps that have been brought back and reskinned from Destiny 1, and they're probably still, I don't want to say almost well over a dozen of the new maps. And the new maps stick out like a sore thumb in comparison to those reskin maps, and I'll tell you why. It's because Destiny 2's map design philosophy operates as a circle. All the maps are designed to be either a circle or a triangle, okay? So they operate on 2 separate points and then an asymmetrical third point, or they just wrap around one another. Now, in a 4v4 setting where things aren't as chaotic and you don't really have to worry about, you have to worry about team play and things like that, it works. It really works because this is where you can have coordination. This is where you can kind of huddle up together and you can figure out your plan of attack. You can't really flank in the old Destiny, so again, you didn't really have to worry about flanking angles to all that much when it came to that type of map design philosophy. In the way the Crucible is now and the way it was in Destiny 1, this doesn't work in the slightest. Not only is it really bad for flanking routes and the fact that and I'm not even saying it's an awareness issue, because even if you're hyper aware, you still get punished for things that you can't control, such as the spawns. The thing about Destiny 1 that was really nice, even though the spawns did have issues in some of the later maps, was that those maps operated like a square. So there would always, no matter how many points a team pushed, they couldn't push all 4 points at once. It was just impossible. You were spread too thin if you ever did that. So even if they pushed 3 of the 4 points, the 4th corner could always be a spot to regroup your team, settle in, and then start to fan out again and work at taking back points of the map. In a circle and a triangle, you can't really do that because everything works in a pincer. So again, this is kind of difficult to explain, but because the way that the maps work, and if there are 2 pressure points, you are just going to end up getting funneled in and spawn trapped. And the problem is that if the game ever tries to take you out of the spawn trap by putting you on another side of the map, it's incredibly easy for the team to just loop around and pincer you back the other way. And there's no other way of escaping it. You can't go from one side to the other. You can, as in adjacently, you can only go to the opposite end of the map and back. That's the only way the game can fix it for you. And again, it just puts you in this endless loop of spawn trapping that you really have no control over, especially in a less coordinated, more chaotic environment like the 6v6 offers. Again, this is an issue with the map design, in my opinion. It's not really an issue with the gameplay itself. The fact that the 4v4 map design elements are still present in Destiny 2 is the problem, and nobody can say that they're still not designing maps that way, because some of the new maps introduced in Forsaken are incredibly tiny and claustrophobic, some of the smallest maps we've ever seen, and are clearly designed with that exact same triangular pattern and or circular pattern in mind that is much more optimal for the smaller team environment. So that has been an issue that has been plaguing it a lot, and I think would alleviate a lot of the other complaints people have with the map so far, such as super stacking, such as spawn trapping, such as getting filled in his backfill and just getting screwed over a bunch, a lot of the issues in competitive. I feel like if Bungie can reconfigure its map design philosophy and maybe go back to the way they did things in Destiny 1, it will be a lot better. That's not to say Destiny 1 maps were perfect. There were plenty of bad eggs in there as well, but there are certain maps that they could definitely look towards to try to remember how they were doing things at Destiny 1, where it worked so much better. I think one example is Burning Shrine, which is something that they have brought back in Destiny 2 as a map called Burnout. And then I think the pinnacle example that everybody uses is Rusted Lands in Destiny 1. It's kind of the quintessential Destiny map, and it really kind of hammers home the idea of what works in the Destiny game type just because of the way that it's designed, where it has both claustrophobic areas and open spaces that work together in tandem, as well as more than 3 points of attack and 3 points of emphasis throughout the map. Anyways, that's enough rambling on that little tidbit. The other thing that Destiny has an issue with, and this is an issue that's been in Destiny 1 as well, is the group matchmaking. Now, this is definitely something that's more prevalent due to the fact that it's close to launch, but it's very, very common to go into a match and to be in a team of if you ever go in like solo, for instance, or even as like group of 2, it's very, very common, probably on 1 in every 3 or 4 games, to get into a match, and then the other team is a full group of 6 or 5 people that just completely stomp you because they're coordinated and on mic and they know exactly what they're doing at all times, or they can actually strategize. Meanwhile, you're just with a bunch of randoms and you really have no chance whatsoever. This happens a lot. There is absolutely no matchmaking parameters whatsoever to put similar sized groups against one another. Not saying that skill-based matchmaking needs to come back, because that's not the same thing. That actually has been a blessing with Destiny 2's matchmaking, that skill-based matchmaking is no longer a thing, and thus I think is in a better state than Destiny 1 is currently. But the group protection and the fact that there's none of that is really an issue that's been plaguing the game an awful lot, both in the quick play modes and the competitive modes. It basically just results in a lost cause of a match 95% of the time. Very, very rarely will you actually be put up against a group that's kind of on the same level as you and your groups of randoms. So, with that said, the PvP is still very good otherwise. Obviously, it suffers from some imbalance issues. Some supers and subclasses are stronger than others. Some weapon types are stronger, but that's always going to be the case in Destiny. I feel like it's better just to work with it than to work against it, and over time things will change, and then you just adjust to the new meta, and you just kind of play the way the game wants you to play, rather than trying to get super frustrated about it and go against the grain and just get stomped all the time, because then you're not going to have a good time. All that said, PvP is fine, it just has some hitches. Let's talk about Gambit now. Ooh boy, Gambit. So, and this is my thoughts, remember this, but let's start by talking about what Gambit is as a mode real quick. It is a PvEVP mode. What does that mean? Player versus environment versus player. 2 teams of 4, and this is actually a mode where 4v4 works, by the way. I'm going to say that. I don't think they should make this any more or less. 4 versus 4 is perfect for this mode. You take 2 teams of 4, you put them on basically separate alternate dimensions of the exact same map. And in this map, they are going to spawn, the game spawns a random set of PvE enemies, and they'll always be the same race or species type for both sides. So it would be like all Cabal, or all Scorn, or which is the new enemy type in Forsaken, or all Vex, or, stuff like that. And they'll have to fight the same kinds of enemies in the same spots. And what they do is you kill these enemies, and depending on the strength of the enemy, they will drop a certain number of what are called motes. They're like these little triangular pickups that you get. They're very similar to the pickups you get in like patrol missions. Grab these, hoard them, and then in the center of your map is a spot where you bank these motes. Okay, you fill up the bank, and this does 2 things. 1, counts towards your progression towards the grand total of 75 motes you need to summon the final boss to then beat and finish the round. And if you bank in threshold, so either 5 for a small one, 10 for a medium one, or 15 for a large one, you spawn blockers, which then go to the other side and not only make the bank inaccessible while they're alive, but then also can do damage to anybody who tries to kill them. So this can halt progress for the other team for a bit, and you can spawn as many as possible on the field at one time, and the other team has to kill them to then access their bank. So there's all sorts of strategic interplay that can be done, woven throughout this. However, there's a nice catch in this mode in that there was a portal that it spawns next to the bank, and every so often that portal will open up, and one player on the team may go through the portal, and that player is then given 30 seconds and an overshield to have free reign and try to kill the other members of the team. Not their enemies, not their PvE enemies, but the players, okay? And killing them does different things depending on where you are in the match. If it's before they have reached their threshold of 75 motes, anytime they kill a player, well, first of all, then they have to obviously respawn, and that sets them back a few seconds. But if they have any motes in their inventory that they haven't yet banked, they lose those entirely. They can't be picked up again. They're just gone, and that's a setback. If the boss is spawned, killing the enemy players will actually heal that boss. Every single time a player dies, the boss that they're trying to fight is healed a little bit, a good chunk of health. And that's the other way you can disrupt progress. However, you're not invincible. You still can be killed. You just have an overshield. So players can then, they'll usually try to run and hide, or they'll try to pull out their strongest weapon and counter you or super you or things like that. But either way, it's a diversion of attention and is a way of sometimes making really huge plays that can, again, disrupt the enemy team. So again, more strategic interplay and counterplay and how this works. There are some issues in Gambit right now where certain weapons dominate everything and certain strategies dominate everything, and there are a couple exploits that are in the game mode, which is, why some people aren't the biggest fan of the mode right now. But in terms of the way that the mode works itself, it's very creative, different, and I think a success of a mode in general. It just has a couple kinks that needs to get worked out, because when the mode is played without these exploits and without these kinks, it's extremely well done, and it is a good time for all involved. Me personally, I'm not a huge fan of the mode, but the reason I'm not a huge fan of the mode is because it is a mode where coordination and team play are very, very important, and I just don't have people to play with. So, or at least people that will be that were willing to play Gambit with me. So, I'm not the biggest fan of the mode. It's not really the best experience as a solo player because you will get a lot of frustration with randoms and stuff like that. But for people who can look past that stuff, or people that do have people to play with, Gambit's a really excellently executed mode. Again, it's nothing like I've ever seen before. I don't know of any game that has anything similar to that. So I applaud them for that. Not to mention the character who runs the whole Gambit mode, the Drifter, is like one of the coolest characters in the Destiny universe. Like, I don't miss Cayde at all because this guy's here now. Like, he completely negated the loss of Cayde like instantaneously with his introduction. He's such a cool character. So regardless, Gambit is, it's another thing to enjoy Forsaken for. There's some people that's all they freaking played. I know there's people who have like ranked up like insane amounts on Gambit already ever since it came out because they just love the mode so much. And who am I to put it past them? It's something that's so unique and unlike anything else, and has a lot of depth to it and a lot of different strategies and counterplay to it. And it switches up constantly. So yeah, kudos to Bungie on that one. So with all of that said, do I think Forsaken is a buy? I said all this stuff at the beginning, obviously, about who I think it is, so how it appeals to certain groups. Me personally, I love Forsaken. I really, really do. There's still elements to it where I don't think I feel quite the same love for the game that I felt back in Destiny 1, where it's just really struck a chord with me. But as far as the actual experience goes of Destiny 2 and what Forsaken brings to the table, it's really well done. I'm going to be hopping on tomorrow and doing all of my stuff when the game resets again, and I'm just going to be enjoying every second of it because I can't get enough right now, and I want to get to the final level, and I want to do that 3-man raid activity and try to solo it myself when I hit the level cap, and blah, blah, blah. Oh, it's so fun. It really is so fun. And I could sit here and gush about it, but at the same time, I do want to be unbiased a bit, and I want to let people know that it's not going to be for everybody, because it's not. But in many ways, again, Forsaken is a triumph. In some ways it's not, but in many ways it is. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, that has been it for this review/impressions of Destiny 2 Forsaken. I hope you all enjoyed it very much. I hope you enjoyed the gameplay in the background, and I will see you all in the next one.